Chapter 6. Man-made, manifest. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. P.S. 83:3-5. The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together, against the Lord, and against his anointed, saying, Let us break their bands asunder, and cast away their cords from us. PS 2:2-3. In 1890 the LDS Church, its members and the priesthood, experienced perhaps their greatest trials and testing. But in this life good and evil are continually pitted against each other. The world appears to be a great theatrical stage where universal powers are reaching out for the souls of men. It is not just a battle of armies and navies, but a contest of simple principles. The battle reaches from the throne of kings down to the secret and sacred chambers of the heart. It is an eternal conflict drawing men towards celestial light or the depths of darkness. If God has apostles, missionaries, and a priesthood, so does the devil. Once again they were to meet in a clash not of arms but of principles. Once again these were the times that tried men's souls. Some of the faithful were sent to prison, while others compromised. A few even turned against their beliefs and became informants and persecutors. It was a time of decision on all levels, a time when the church leaders felt they had to make some official declaration in an effort to bring temporal relief. On December 2, 1889, an official declaration was issued by the church relative to an Idaho test oath law, which was unconstitutional but upheld by the Supreme Court. It was signed by the First Presidency and published in the Deseret News, December 21, 1889. On December 12, 1889, a second official declaration was issued on the subject of blood atonement. Professor James R. Clark explained. This official declaration was a direct outgrowth of the testimony and accusations made in the cases before Judge Anderson. The presidency and the 12 considered the matter when it was decided as the mind of the council that the First Presidency and the 12 apostles get up a manifesto on this subject, such a one as all can sign. The declaration brands as false any claims that the LDS Church believed in or practiced blood atonement. The declaration or manifesto was dated December 12, 1889, and was published in the Evening Deseret News. Messages of the First Presidency, Vol. 3, page 183. The following is a photocopy of the December 12, 1889, official declaration, showing part of pages 1 and 3. Official declaration. Salt Lake City, December 12, 1889. To whom it may concern. In consequence of gross misrepresentations of the doctrines, aims, and practices of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly called the Mormon Church, which have been promulgated for years and have recently been revived for political purposes and to prevent all aliens, otherwise qualified, who are members of the Mormon Church from acquiring citizenship, we deem it proper on behalf of said church to publicly deny these calumnies and enter our protest against them. We solemnly make the following declarations, viz. That this church views the shedding of human blood with the utmost abhorrence, that we regard the killing of a human being, except in conformity with the civil law, as a capital crime which should be punished by shedding the blood of the criminal after a public trial before a legally constituted court of the land. Notwithstanding all the stories told about the killing of apostates, no case of this kind has ever occurred, and of course has never been established against the church we represent. Hundreds of seceders from the church have continuously resided and now live in this territory, many of whom have amassed considerable wealth, though bitterly hostile to the Mormon faith and people. Even those who have made it their business to fabricate the vilest falsehoods and to render them plausible by culling isolated passages from old sermons without the explanatory context, and have suffered no opportunity to escape them of vilifying and blackening the characters of the people, have remained among those whom they have thus persistently calumniated until the present day, without receiving the slightest personal injury. We denounce as entirely untrue the allegation which has been made that our church favors or believes in the killing of persons who leave the church or apostatize from its doctrines. We would view a punishment of this character for such an act with the utmost horror. It is abhorrent to us, and is in direct opposition to the fundamental principles of our creed. The revelations of God to this church make death the penalty for capital crime, and require that offenders against life and property shall be delivered up to and tried by the laws of the land. We declare that no bishops or other courts in this church claims or exercises the right to supersede, annul, or modify a judgment of any civil court. Such courts, while established to regulate Christian conduct, are purely ecclesiastical, and their punitive powers go no further than the suspension or excommunication of members from church fellowship. That this church, while offering advice for the welfare of its members in all conditions of life, does not claim or exercise the right to interfere with citizens in the free exercise of social or political rights and privileges. The ballot in this territory is absolutely untrammeled and secret. No man's business or other secular affairs are invaded by the church or any of its officers. Free agency and direct individual accountability to God are among the essentials of our church doctrine. All things in the church must be done by common consent, and no officer is appointed without the vote of the body. We declare that there is nothing in the ceremony of the endowment, or in any doctrine, tenet, obligation or injunction of this church, either private or public, which is hostile or intended to be hostile to the government of the United States. On the contrary, its members are under divine commandment to revere the Constitution as a heaven-inspired instrument. Utterances of prominent men in the church at a time of great excitement have been selected and grouped to convey the impression that present members are seditious. Those expressions were made more than 30 years ago, when through the falsehoods of recreant officials, afterwards demonstrated to be baseless, troops were sent to this territory and were viewed by the people, in their isolated condition, 1,500 miles from railroads, as an armed mob coming to renew the bloody persecutions of years before. At that time excitement prevailed and strong language was used, but no words of disloyalty against the government or its institutions were uttered. Public speakers confined their remarks to denouncing traitorous officials who were prostituting the powers of their positions to accomplish nefarious ends. Criticism of the acts of United States officials was not considered then, neither is it now, as treason against the nation, nor as hostility to the government. In this connection we may say that the members of our church have never offered or intended to offer any insult to the flag of our country, but have always honored it as the ensign of laws and liberty. We also declare that this church does not claim to be an independent temporal kingdom of God, or to be an imperium in imperio, aiming to overthrow the United States or any other civil government. It has been organized by divine revelation preparatory to the second advent of the Redeemer. It proclaims that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Its members are commanded of God to be subject unto the powers that be until Christ comes, whose right it is to reign. Church government and civil government are distinct and separate in our theory and practice, and we regard it as part of our destiny to aid in the maintenance and perpetuity of the institutions of our country. We claim no religious liberty that we are unwilling to accord to others. We ask for no civil or political rights which are not granted and guaranteed to citizens in general. We desire to be in harmony with the government and people of the United States as an integral part of the nation. We regard all attempts to exclude aliens from naturalization and citizens from the exercise of the elective franchise solely because they are members of the Mormon Church as impolitic, unrepublican, and dangerous encroachments upon civil and religious liberty. Notwithstanding the wrongs we consider we have suffered through the improper execution of national laws, we regard those wrongs as the acts of men and not of the government, and we intend, by the help of omnipotence, to remain firm in our fealty and steadfast in the maintenance of constitutional principles and the integrity of this republic. We earnestly appeal to the American press and people not to condemn the Latter-day Saints unheard. Must we always be judged by the misrepresentations of our enemies, and never be accorded a fair opportunity of representing ourselves? In the name of justice, reason, and humanity, we ask for a suspension of national and popular judgment until a full investigation can be had and all the facts connected with what is called the Mormon question call be known. And we appeal to the eternal judge of all men and nations to aid us in the vindication of our righteous cause. Wilford Woodruff, George Q. Cannon, Joseph F. Smith, Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Lorenzo Snow, Franklin D. Richards, Brigham Young, Moses Thatcher, Francis M. Lyman, John Henry Smith, George Teasdale, Heber J. Grant, John W. Taylor, 1. W. Merrill, 2. H. Lund, Abraham H. Cannon, members of the Council of the Apostles, John W. Young, Daniel H. Wells, counselors. A few months later came a third official declaration or manifesto from the LDS Church. This one pertained to plural marriage. All three of these manifestos were intended to soften the prejudice and persecution from a hostile nation. In 1887, the United States carried out an astonishing act. A nation founded upon the principle of religious freedom, which had enshrined that principle in its Constitution's Bill of Rights, passed a law that dissolved a church. The Edmunds Act of 1882 took direct aim at ending polygamy, and the Edmunds-Tucker Act of 1887 went far beyond authorizing polyg hunts. It set out to destroy the Church's temporal kingdom. Mormon America, R.J. Osling, page 76. Thus, a terrible burden was placed on the shoulders of President Wilford Woodruff. The U.S. government had become a vicious mob and was stealing, destroying and throwing good men into prison. The vast majority of the Mormon people were opposed to living plural marriage, but were suffering because of the actions of a small minority. In this quandary, Woodruff tried to find a satisfactory solution. However, most of the answers were not supportive of the priesthood and its laws. A few months previously, the Lord had revealed to Press Woodruff, "Let not my servants who are called to the presidency of my church deny my word or my law, which concerns the salvation of the children of men. My kingdom shall roll forth." LDS Manual, page 58, also Messages of the First Presidency, 3175. Thus, Woodruff was caught between the U.S. government and most church members on one side, and the Word of God, the priesthood and the polygamists on the other. Some type of compromise seemed inevitable, and he presented such to the Quorum of the 12. Although Wilford Woodruff had been a vocal opponent to any form of concession with the government concerning plural marriage during the Taylor administration, when the leadership of the church fell on him as senior apostle, he began to seek avenues of compromise. During the next 3 years, he would present to the quorum on at least 2 occasions drafts of documents that would relinquish plural marriage. Both were soundly rejected by the rest of the Quorum of the 12. Collected Discourses, Bryanstye, Vol. 2, Xyz Xiv. Wilford Woodruff also had admitted, "After I became president of the church, I did not advocate the practice of this principle among our people, for that was what I saw before me, and it was upon that ground that I issued the manifesto. I believe it was my duty and the duty of our people to obey the law." Deseret News Weekly, October 20, 1891. President Woodruff was also caught between the loud clamor of the people and his own silent conviction of the truthfulness of this marriage covenant. This was God's covenant, a spiritual contract that should not be broken. Once the saints had entered into such eternal covenants, they should not look back. Lot's wife taught us that. Reverend George Peters, author of a 3-volume set on the theocratic kingdom, wrote a precious gem that should be an anchor to our souls. Any theory, inference, or doctrine which militates against the covenants is not only open to grave suspicion, but must be rejected, no matter by whom presented or however eloquently urged. God cannot, does not, contradict himself. Theocratic Kingdom, Peters, 3 565. A similar test had been experienced by President John Taylor 5 years before. There had been some talk about President Taylor issuing a revelation abolishing that system of marriage. When a revelation of that kind is given, it will be when the Lord has no use for the Latter-day Saints. Day News, April 6, 1885. Until now there had been no literal shots fired and no one had been killed, but Brigham Young hadn't been that concerned if it were to happen, for he commented, "Suppose that the wicked kill us, who cares? They never will kill any, but what it will swell the kingdom a little faster." JD 4374. Under such stressful conditions, Wilford Woodruff issued the Manifesto of 1890, in actuality, a press release with the hope it would have peaceful results. To whom it may concern? Press dispatches having been sent for political purposes from Salt Lake City, which have been widely published, to the effect that the Utah Commission, in their recent report to the Secretary of the Interior, allege that plural marriages are still being solemnized, and that 40 or more such marriages have been contracted in Utah since last June or during the past year. Also that in public discourses the leaders of the church have taught, encouraged and urged the continuance of the practice of polygamy. I, therefore, as President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, do hereby, in the most solemn manner, declare that these charges are false. We are not teaching polygamy or plural marriage, nor permitting any person to enter into its practice, and I deny that either 40 or any other number of plural marriages have during that period been solemnized in our temples or in any other place in the territory. One case has been reported in which the parties allege that the marriage was performed in the Endowment House in Salt Lake City in the spring of 1889, but I have not been able to learn who performed the ceremony. Whatever was done in the matter was without my knowledge. In consequence of this alleged occurrence, the Endowment House was, by my instructions, taken down without delay. Inasmuch as laws have been enacted by Congress forbidding plural marriages, which laws have been pronounced constitutional by the court of last resort, I hereby declare my intention to submit to those laws and to use my influence with the members of the church over which I preside to have them do likewise. There is nothing in my teachings to the Church or in those of my associates during the time specified which can be reasonably construed to inculcate or encourage polygamy, and when any elder of the Church has used language which appeared to convey any such teaching, he has been promptly reproved. And I now publicly declare that my advice to the Latter-day Saints is to refrain from contracting any marriage forbidden by the law of the land. Signed, Wilford Woodruff, President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Important ideas to point out regarding this manifesto are: 1. It was addressed to whom it may concern. We must decide who that might be. Was it the government, the church, individual church members, lawyers, or the Gentiles? It didn't say. 2. It began as an answer to, and was mostly concerned with press dispatches. It appears to be written for them. 3. Woodruff said, I deny that either 40 or any other number of plural marriages have during that period been solemnized in our temples or in any other place in the territory. He knew, however, that these marriages were still being performed in Canada and Mexico. 4. Then, because someone had performed a plural marriage in the endowment house, he said, in consequence of this alleged occurrence, the endowment house was, by my instructions, taken down without delay. 5. Since Congress had forbidden plural marriages, Wilford Woodruff declared his intention to submit to those laws, which he disregarded 7 years later, when he was sealed to the Palestinian lady lecturer Ms. Lydia Mountford. 6. Wilford Woodruff personally said he would submit to those laws and would use my influence with the members of the church ... to have them do likewise. This was his influence rather than God's revelation. 7. When any elder of the church used language to encourage the practice of plural marriage, he has been promptly reproved. 8. When Woodruff said, there is nothing in my teachings or in any others that would encourage polygamy, it announced the end of the era of celestial marriage within the church. 9. Then, in conclusion, he said, I, Wilford Woodruff, not the Lord, now publicly declare that my advice to the Latter-day Saints is to refrain from contracting any marriage forbidden by the law of the land. 10. A prophet of God will always tell you to obey the laws of God, regardless of any other laws, rules, or codes. Prophets do not advise people to disobey the laws of God so they can be convenienced by the laws of man. Since the Manifesto of 1890 was a decisive factor in priesthood authority existing outside the LDS Church organization, we need to learn more about this important document. Thus, the following issues will be discussed in more detail. 1. Who wrote the Manifesto? 2. Was the Manifesto a revelation? 3. Did the Manifesto really stop plural marriage? 4. One plural marriage manifesto or many? 5. Comparisons and contradictions. 6. The Manifesto in retrospect. 1. Who wrote the Manifesto? If the Manifesto was actually a revelation from God, then we would know that the law of plural marriage was not an eternal one, that it could be revoked, and is not necessary for exaltation. In that case, fundamentalist Mormons would have no grounds for living plural marriage today. Furthermore, we would know that it is not an eternal priesthood law. However, if the Manifesto is not a revelation from God, then there must be evidence to prove it. A thorough study of the Manifesto is vital to correctly understanding priesthood today. First of all, let's determine its source of authorship. There is no reference made about God in the text. It does not say, "Thus saith the Lord," and it is signed by only one person, Wilford Woodruff, although according to the following information, he did not write it either. Shortly after the turn of the 19th century, a missionary serving in England and Wales by the name of Thomas J.R. Osser had an experience that indicated the true authorship of the Manifesto. In a letter to Robert C. Newson of Salt Lake City, dated August 4, 1956, Rosser related the following account. Then I went back to Bristol, England, my headquarters, to a conference, which was held Sunday, May 24, 1908. On Monday morning, the 25th, our conference priesthood meeting was held, which lasted 4 hours and a half. After the preliminary exercises, President Charles W. Penrose asked if any of the brethren had any questions on their minds, and if so, to present them now before he delivered his message to us. Up went my hand. All right, he said. President Penrose, I said, I have heard much discussion on the principle of plural marriage, some saying that it is withdrawn from the earth, and that the Manifesto was a revelation from God. Dear President, what about this case? Then I related to him the testimony of the sister, which is written above, and then I asked him, why should she receive this testimony if God has withdrawn the principle from the earth, and the Manifesto is a true revelation from God? President Penrose then rose to his feet, scratched the side of his head with his right hand for a moment or so, then stretched out his right hand toward us and said, "Brethren, I will answer that question, if you will keep it under your hats. I, Charles W. Penrose, wrote the manifesto with the assistance of Frank J. Cannon and John White. It's no revelation from God, for I wrote it. Wilford Woodruff signed it to beat the devil at his own game. Brethren, how can God withdraw an everlasting principle from the earth? He is not and cannot, and I testify to you as a servant of God that this is true." The reason the statement is given is because I have heard so much discussion as to whether or not the Manifesto of 1890 is a revelation from God, and so I wish to relate herewith the understanding given to us at the Bristol Conference by President Charles W. Penrose on May 25, 1908. Sincerely, your brother, O.S. Thomas J. Osser. Entire letter is quoted in the Holy Priesthood, Kraut, 6:264-265. The LDS Church responded to this information by saying that they had no record of Rosser or Penrose being in Wales in May 1908. However, the Wales meeting had been moved to Bristol, according to the following report recorded in the Millennial Star. The Bristol Semi-Annual Conference was held May 24-8 in the Wolseley Hall, Eastville, Bristol. There were present President Charles W. Penrose, President C.G. Jarman and 24 traveling elders of the Bristol Conference. After singing and prayer, President Jarman gave all present a hearty welcome. Expressed his appreciation at seeing so many saints and friends present from the outlying districts. Elders R. J. Walker, Thomas J. Osser, Frank I. Hill and John H. Bawden gave reports of their respective branches. The reports were very encouraging. Mill. Star 7348. Elder George Reynolds also gave his testimony that he, too, helped draft the manifesto. His statement was presented in the Smoot hearings in Washington, D.C. in January 1904. The chairman: "I do not know, but I may have misunderstood. I understood this manifesto was inspired." Mr. Reynolds: "Yes." The chairman: "That is your understanding of it?" Mr. Reynolds: "My understanding was that it was inspired." The chairman: "And when it was handed to you, it was an inspiration, as you understand, from on high, was it not?" Mr. Reynolds: "Yes." The chairman: "What business had you changing it?" Mr. Reynolds: "We did not change the meaning." The chairman: "You have just stated you changed it." Mr. Reynolds: "Not the sense, sir. I didn't state we changed the sense." The chairman: "But you changed the phraseology?" Mr. Reynolds: "We simply put it in shape for publication, corrected possibly the grammar, and wrote it so that." The chairman: "You mean to say that in an inspired communication from the Almighty the grammar was bad, was it? You corrected the grammar of the Almighty, did you?" Read Smoot Hearings 252-53. Later in his testimony he identifies two others who helped author the manifesto. Mr. Worthington: "You said something about helping to write the manifesto. Will you explain that?" Mr. Reynolds: "President Woodruff wrote it in his own hand and he was a very poor writer, worse, I believe, than Horace Greeley, and he gave it into the hands of 3 of the elders to prepare it for the press. I was one of those 3. Mr. Worthington: "Who were the 3? Mr. Reynolds: C. W. Penrose, John R. Winder, and myself. Ibid. 269. Thus, according to the above 2 separate accounts, there were at least 6 brethren who assisted in writing the manifesto. Wilford Woodruff, Charles W. Penrose, Frank J. Cannon, John White, John R. Winder, and George Reynolds. Isn't it amazing that so many men would be required to improve on a revelation from the Lord before it could be presented to the saints for their vote? It was often brought up that the manifesto was only a trick to beat the devil at his own game. This was mentioned first by Press Charles Penrose in his Bristol Missionary Conference. It also came up in the Smoot hearings in 1904-05. According to Professor Wolfe from Provo. Mr. Wolfe: "There was a meeting in the Brigham Young Academy, in Provo, Utah, that was addressed by B.F. Grant, a brother of Apostle Heber J. Grant. At that meeting Apostle John Henry Smith was present." The chairman: "On what date was that? What year?" Mr. Wolfe: "I don't remember the year. It was in the late 90s, probably." Mr. Carlyle: "It was after the manifesto?" Mr. Wolfe: "Yes, sir, it was after the manifesto. On my way home I walked several blocks with B.F. Grant and Apostle Smith, and on the way we were talking about the conditions existing, and President Smith used these words to me: 'Brother Wolfe, don't you know that the manifesto is only a trick to beat the devil at his own game?' Ibid. 413. Does this sound like a description of a revelation from God? The Salt Lake Tribune of January 16, 1906, exposed the same plot behind the manifesto. The headlines read, "Manifesto only trick to beat devil at own game." Church schemers decided on a political manifesto with the federal government to beat them at their own game. They conceived the idea that if they made a polygamy concession with the government, they could then obtain statehood. As a state, they would introduce a law that would provide protection for those living plural marriage. Utah gained its statehood and finally introduced a bill which would allow the religious practice of plural marriage in the state. Senate Bill No. 113 was introduced on March 6, 1901, by Abel John Evans. It was to amend Section 4611 of the Revised Statutes of Utah. But the governor, Heber M. Wells, a product himself of plural marriage, vetoed the bill with the excuse that it offered the polygamists only a false hope of protection. So that ray of hope behind issuing the manifesto was shattered within 5 years. Instead of laws being amended or instigated by the state for the protection of polygamists, the laws became worse, and in 1934 plural marriage was made a felony. Thus ended the trick to beat the devil at his own game. Instead, the devil used the Mormons themselves to win it for him. A bill to protect polygamists was never again presented for passage. 2. Was the manifesto a revelation? There are certain criteria that can be used in determining whether or not something is a revelation from God. Probably the easiest one to recognize is when it contains the words, "Thus saith the Lord." In the Doctrine and Covenants there are 64 "Thus saith the Lord" revelations. The rest may be revelations, but should more correctly be considered pronouncements or statements. The Bible has over 450 "Thus saith the Lord" revelations, immediately identifying the true author of the statements. For over a century, historians have looked, without success, for indications that the manifesto could be considered a revelation from God. On the other hand, there are several indications that it was written by man. In the 1890 manifesto, Wilford Woodruff used such terms as, "I, therefore, as president of the church, I deny, I have not been, my instructions, I hereby declare, I preside, my associates, I now publicly declare that my advice is, Then to top it off, he signed it with his own signature. Thus, to determine the true source of the manifesto is very simple. It came from Wilford Woodruff. It could not be any clearer than if it began by saying, "Thus saith Wilford Woodruff." A comparable declaration, or press release, was issued several years later in 1978. This declaration on blacks receiving the priesthood began by saying, "Dear brethren," and continued with, "We have witnessed has inspired us with a desire we have pleaded long, and earnestly we declare with soberness," and concluded with, "Sincerely yours," and signed by the First Presidency. The authorship is clear. Church members were asked to vote on this revelation, even though a "Thus saith the Lord" revelation was not produced to support it. In contrast, the Church does not recognize the 1886 "Thus saith the Lord" revelation to John Taylor for the following reasons. 1. Church leaders claim it is not in the LDS archives. 2. The saints never voted to accept or adopt it. 3. Church leaders and the majority of the saints chose to be at peace with the government and fellow citizens. It is interesting to note that in 1933 Heber J. Grant issued the following official statement concerning the 1886 revelation. It is alleged that on September 26 to 27, 1886, President John Taylor received a revelation from the Lord, the purported text of which is given in publications circulated apparently by or at the instance of the same organization, Polygamists. As to this pretended revelation, it should be said that the archives of the Church contain no such revelation, nor any evidence justifying a belief that any such revelation was ever given. From the personal knowledge of some of us, from the uniform and common recollection of the presiding quorums of the Church, from the absence in the Church archives of any evidence whatsoever justifying any belief that such a revelation was given, we are justified in affirming that no such revelation exists. Furthermore, so far as the authorities of the Church are concerned and so far as the members of the Church are concerned, since this pretended revelation, if ever given, was never presented to and adopted by the Church, or by any council of the Church. The said pretended revelation could have no validity and no binding effect and force upon Church members, and action under it would be unauthorized, illegal, and void. Official Statement, Church Section, Day, News, June 18, 1933. As a sidelight, the author called the LDS archives and asked for a copy of the revelation on which the official declaration of 1978 was based. He was told that there is no revelation on record other than the published statement itself. Thus, using the same criteria for the 1890 and 1978 declarations as that which Grant imposed on the 1886 revelation, any action under it would be unauthorized, illegal, and void, because the archives of the Church contain no such revelation. Furthermore, because of the absence in the Church archives of any evidence whatsoever justifying any belief that such a revelation was given, we are justified in affirming that no such revelation exists. So, according to the criteria established by President Heber J. Grant, the official declarations of both 1890 and 1978 are unauthorized, illegal, and void, as many fundamentalist Mormons have already suspected. President Woodruff claimed that the Lord told him what to do to present the manifesto to the saints for a vote, which he did. That is the proper order of the Church. The members can vote for or against a particular doctrine or policy, since the Lord will not force the saints to live plural marriage or any other doctrine against their will. Returning to the question, was the manifesto a revelation? The answer became a little more clear in December 1891, when some Gentiles told the Mormon leaders they should send a petition for amnesty to the government because they had compliantly issued the manifesto. Church leaders responded and sent a petition to President Harrison, stating, to be in peace with the government and in harmony with their fellow citizens who are not of their faith, and to share in the confidence of the government and people, our people have voluntarily put aside something which all their lives they have believed to be a sacred principle. Smoot Hearings 1:18. This statement that they voluntarily put aside, a sacred principle does not specify that it was a commandment from God, but a free choice of the church members. It was so stated and signed by the church presidency and all of the apostles. 3. Did the manifesto stop plural marriage? In the book entitled The Life of Joseph F. Smith by Joseph Fielding Smith, it lists the names of 14 children born to Joseph F. and 5 of his wives after the manifesto. However, he was not an exception because hundreds of saints in Utah, Canada, and Mexico continued bearing and raising children by plural wives, and many took new wives as well. Another leading church apostle was exposed by the Salt Lake Tribune on September 9, 1899. Heber J. Grant confessed in court to living with his 3 wives and paid a $100 fine. The following picture appeared in the newspaper. Picture of Heber J. Grant in court. Then on October 8, 1910, the Salt Lake Tribune, known for its anti-polygamy position, listed names of 200 new polygamists, 6 of whom were members of the Quorum of 12 Apostles. This list follows with names of apostles in caps. Baldridge, Isaac Bentley, Joseph the 100th. Allard, Calvert Black, David. Anderson, Alfred Black, Morley. Badger, Rodney C. Bloomfield, John. Barlow, Israel Jr. Bowman, Henry the 100th. Brown, Isaiah Brainholt, Chris. Beckcroft, John Branley, Theodore. Beasley, Fred Brown, Orson P. Bench, Ephraim Brown, Richard D. Bennion, Heber Buckholt, William. Bennion, Israel Butler, Elder. Bennion, S.R. Call, Anson B. Paul, Willard Jarvis, Samuel. Cannon, A.H. Johansson, Jens. Cannon, Angus J. Johnson, Benjamin. Cannon, George M. Johnson, David. Cannon, Hugh J. Johnson, Heber. Cannon, John M. Johnson, J. Francis. Cannon, Lewis M. Johnson, Abiah. Carroll, James Johnson, William D. Carroll, Thomas Jolly, Haskell S. Carroll, Willard Jones, Daniel B. Chamberlain, Thos. Jorgensen, J.S. Cheney, Frank Kelsch, Louis B. Clark, Arthur Lebron, Don. Clayson, Nathan Lemon, Peter. Clough, Benjamin Lewis, Walter. Clough, Hiram Lillywhite, Chaz. W. Corden, Joseph Longhurst, Warren. Corden, Louis P. Lyman, Walter C. Cowley, Matthias F. McCall, Robert. Cox, Amos Miller, Reuben. Dean, Joseph H. McClellan, Chaz. E. Dennis Israel F. McClellan, George. Dunn, Abraham McGregor, D.A. Dunn, Elder Mehmet, J.W. Driggs, Apollos Merrill, Albert. Drochet, Peter Merrill, Chaz. G. Durfee, M. Morell, Joseph. Eager, John Morris, Robert. Eager, Joseph Michelson, Maurice. Eccles, David Muir, Daniel. Eccles, Elder Musser, Joseph W. Ellison, E.P. Nagel, Bishop. Emmett, James Nagley, George. Ehring, Ed Nagley, James. Farr, Winslow Nagley, John. Goslin, Peter Newton, Samuel. Grant, Joseph H. Nielsen, Carl. Grace, Isaac A. Chalky, William. Haig, Elder Payne, Edward. Hurst, Walter Peterson, Franz. Hardy, John Pierce, Brigham. Hardy, Abel Pratt, Helleman. Harmer, Lauren Pratt, Ray L. Hart, Arthur W. Parkinson, Geo. C. Hawes, George M. Raymer, W. H. Haymore, F. D. Rich, Ben E. Hickman, Francis Richardson, Edmund. Hickman, Josiah E. Richens, Parley. Higgs, Alpha J. R. Robinson, John, 1. Hilton, Thomas Robinson, John, 2. Hyde, Ezra T. Robinson, Joseph E. Humphrey, John A. Romney, George S. James, Joseph Romney, Miles A. Jameson, Alex. Romney, Miles P. Jarman, Charles Romney, Thomas. Richens, Orson. Regis, W. M. G. Rinch, James. Sanders, Peter. Sears, W. M. G. Tenney, Levi. Sessions, Byron Thomas, Elder, 1. Sherwood, Robert Thomas, Elder, 2. Silver, John Thurber, Albert. Silver, Joseph Thurber, Alan D. Skousen, Daniel Thurber, Joseph. Skousen, James Todd, Donald M. Steed, Walter Turley, Ed. Skousen, Peter Turley, Ernest. Smalley, John Turley, Joseph. Smith, Isaac Wall, Frank W. Smith, Jesse M. Walser, J.J. Smith, Jesse M. J.R. Walser, J.J. Jr. Snar, Daniel Wetton, John T. Spencer, Elder Whipple, Chaz. Spilsbury, Alma P. Wilson, David. Spilsbury, David Wilson, Guy C. Steele, M. M. Wilson, Lycurgus F. Stevens, Alma Woods, Jonathan. Stevens, John Wolfenden, Chaz. Stevens, Joshua Wood, Edward J. Stoll, John Willie, D.O. Stowell, Brigham Woodruff, A.O. Stringham, Bryant Rathel, James. Summerhays, J.W. Watson, Hugh. Tanner, Joseph M. Young, Newell K. Tanner, Henry S. Young, Brigham Jr. Taylor, Alonzo Young, Don Carlos. Taylor, E.L. Young, Royal B. Taylor, Frank Y. Young, William. Taylor, Guy Zundel, Abraham. Taylor, John W. Teasdale, George. Most new plural marriages after the Manifesto were performed in Canada and Mexico, with some in the United States or at sea beyond the national boundary. These sealings were performed by such leaders as George Q. Cannon, Joseph F. Smith, John W. Taylor, Anthony W. Ivins, Matthias F. Cowley, and John Henry Smith, as well as by others outside of the quorum. These ordinances were generally performed very secretly. For instance, a recommend was often written in code, as the following letter exemplifies. Note: for more proof of post-manifesto plural marriage, the author recommends Michael Quinn's article, LDS Church Authority and New Plural Marriages, 1890-1904, Dialogue 18-1, Spring 1985, pages 9-105. Pioneer Electric. Power Company of Utah. Office of the President and Treasurer. Salt Lake City, Utah, February 1, 98. Dear Brother Anthony, I take the liberty of introducing the bearer to you. He expects to visit your country to attend to some business there, and I think, stranger as he is, you can be of service to him. Whatever aid you can render him will be appreciated by your brother, G.O. Q. Cannon. A coded recommend letter from George Q. Cannon to Anthony W. Ivins in Mexico to authorize him to perform a plural marriage. 4. One plural marriage manifesto or many? On April 6, 1904, Joseph F. Smith issued what later became known as the Second Manifesto. This was also an official declaration without any revelation supporting it. Since the first manifesto was apparently not very effective, they issued another. In fact, there was an intermittent stream of little manifestos in support of the more significant ones. A third major manifesto came on June 17, 1933, issued by the First Presidency, Heber J. Grant, Anthony W. Ivins, and Charles Nibley, as an official statement again without the backup of a heavenly revelation. There was a constant barrage of announcements to emphasize to church members that it was their duty to inform on anyone they thought might believe, teach, or practice plural marriage. We have been, however, and we are entirely willing and anxious too that such offenders against the law of the state should be dealt with and punished as the law provides. We have been and we are willing to give such legal assistance as we legitimately can in the criminal prosecution of such cases. We are willing to go to such limits not only because we regard it as our duty as citizens of the country to assist in the enforcement of the law and the suppression of pretended plural marriages, but also because we wish to do everything humanly possible to make our attitude toward this matter so clear, definite, and unequivocal as to leave no possible doubt of it in the mind of any person. Messages of the First Presidency 5:292-293. Those holding church leadership positions increasingly fought against plural marriage instead of teaching and practicing it. But the prophet Joseph Smith had said, "Where there is no change of priesthood, there is no change of ordinances." TPJS, page 308. Conversely, then, if there is a change in ordinances, there is a change or loss of priesthood. 5. Comparisons and contradictions. During the years leading up to the 1890 Manifesto, many justifications for political compromise were presented by church leaders and members alike. But for every one they thought up, God had already countered with one of his own. Consider the following comparison quotes on 7 issues. 1. Compromise. 2. Temples. 3. Unanimous vote. 4. The wisest course. 5. Leading people astray. 6. Power and dominion. 7. Continuing importance of plural marriage. 1. Compromise. The God of heaven commanded me to do what I did do, and when the hour came that I was commanded to do that, it was all clear to me. I went before the Lord, and I wrote what the Lord told me to write, the Manifesto. I leave this with you, for you to contemplate and consider. Excerpts from 3 addresses by Press, Wilford Woodruff regarding the Manifesto Doc, Ann Cove, 1981 ed. p. 293. Let not my servants who are called to the presidency of my church deny my word or my law, which concerns the salvation of the children of men. Place not yourselves in jeopardy to your enemies by promise. Let my servants who officiate as your counselors before the courts make their pleadings as they are moved upon by the Holy Spirit, without any further pledges from my priesthood. 1889 Revelation to W. Woodruff, Mess. Of First Press, Clark, 3 176. 1. Temples. Yes, I saw by vision and revelation this temple in the hands of the wicked. I saw our city in the hands of the wicked. I saw every temple in these valleys in the hands of the wicked. I saw great destruction among the people. All these things would have come to pass, as God Almighty lives, had not that manifesto been given. Discourses of Wilford Woodruff, page 214. Zion shall prevail against her enemies. My people shall not be hindered in building of my temples unto my holy name, if they will hearken unto my voice and do as I command them. 1880 Revelation to Wilford Woodruff, verses 37 and 40, Revelations 1880 to 1890, Pioneer Press, page 13. 1. Unanimous vote? When that manifesto was given, they accepted it. Why? Because they had the Spirit of God for themselves, they knew for themselves it was right. It was passed, also, before 10,000 Latter-day Saints, and there was not a solitary hand raised against that edict. Discourses of Wilford Woodruff, page 214. At a century's distance it is difficult to ascertain precisely what the strength of the vote was. The official report in the Deseret News and accounts given since in publications of the Church say that approval of the manifesto was unanimous. Statements in other accounts, also friendly to the Church, describe the vote as "NEAR unanimous." While we know of one confirmed contrary vote, there is evidence that some refused to vote either way, including at least one of the general authorities. This was Brigham H. Roberts, who, reflecting on the propriety of presenting the manifesto in conference at all, said, "During the conference I saw that movements were on foot to have the whole people support it, a proceeding I viewed with alarm. When the crisis came I felt heartbroken but remained silent. It seemed to me to be the awfulest moment in my life. My arm was like lead when the motion was put. I could not vote for it, and did not. Solemn Covenant, B. Carmen Hardy, page 135. 1. The wisest course. The question is this: which is the wisest course for the Latter-day Saints to pursue, to continue to attempt to practice plural marriage with the laws of the nation against it, or, after doing and suffering what we have through our adherence to this principle, to cease the practice and submit to the law, and doing so leave the prophets, apostles and fathers at home. Address, Doc. Ann Cove. Current edition, page 292. For my priesthood, whom I have called and whom I have sustained and honored, shall honor me and obey my laws, and the laws of my priesthood, saith the Lord. October 13, 1882, Revelation to John Taylor, Mess. Of First Press, 2 347. 1. Leading people astray. I say to Israel, the Lord will never permit me nor any other man who stands as the president of this church to lead you astray. It is not in the program. It is not in the mind of God. Wilford Woodruff, History of His Life and Labors, Matthias F. Cowley, page 572. And if he should suffer him, Joseph Smith, to lead the people astray, it would be because they ought to be led astray. If he should suffer them to be chastised, and some of them destroyed, it would be because they deserved it. Brigham Young, J.D. 4 297-298. 1. Power and dominion. It is not wisdom for us to make war upon 65 millions of people. It is not wisdom for us to go forth and carry out this principle against the laws of the nation, and receive the consequences. Wilford Woodruff. Cowley, page 571. And you shall be my people, and I will be your God, and your enemies shall not have dominion over you, for I will preserve you and confound them, saith the Lord, and they shall not have power nor dominion over you. October 13, 1882, Revelation to John Taylor, Mess. Of First Press, 2 347. 1. Continuing importance of plural marriage. John Nuttall received a telegram from Prest Woodruff containing a declaration or manifesto from him in regard to recent report of the Utah Commission on the subject of polygamous marriages and of the preaching of that doctrine by the church authorities, in which he denies their statements and declares himself as willing to obey the laws of the nation on that subject and to advise the members of the church to do likewise, etc. Bro. Kane made arrangements to have the declaration or manifesto published in the "TVENING* and "CRITIC", and to have it printed in a circular letter or pamphlet for distribution to the President, Cabinet, Senate, and House of Reps and other leading men. Diary of L. John Nuttall, Thursday, September 25, 1890. The reason why the Church and Kingdom of God cannot advance without the patriarchal order of marriage is that it belongs to this dispensation, just as baptism for the dead does, or any law or ordinance that belongs to a dispensation. Without it the Church cannot progress. The leading men of Israel who are presiding over stakes will have to obey the law of Abraham, or they will have to resign. Wilford Woodruff. Cowley, page 542. 6. The Manifesto in retrospect. LDS Church historian Leonard Arrington provided a little-known insight into the manifesto, wherein he states that national and church leaders made an agreement, or compact. National leaders and church leaders are said to have entered into a compact. We do not know whether such a compact was actually made, but at least the agreement and actions which it is said to have involved did take place. In the supposed compact, national leaders are said to have promised statehood for Utah, provided three things were done. 1. Plural marriage was abandoned. 2. The church political party was dissolved. And 3. The church dissolved its relations with the economy. Plural marriage, of course, was abandoned with the Manifesto of 1890, the People's Party was dissolved in 1891, and the people were divided between Republicans and Democrats, and the church began to take steps to withdraw from many of its economic activities. Religion and Economics in Mormon History. Leonard J. Arrington, BYU Studies, 331-32. Detrimental results followed their agreement to comply with these three compromises. A. When plural marriage was abandoned, the Mormons reverted back to the Roman law of monogamy with its divorces, mistresses, prostitution, and immoralities. B. When the United Order was dissolved, the saints were then encumbered with debts, mortgages, the IRS, and taxation. C. When the Kingdom of God was abolished, the saints were thrown into the wonderful world of Democrats, Republicans, political corruption, a million laws, abandonment of the Constitution, and the loss of freedom. In retrospect, it could be said that the Manifesto had a greater effect on living the United Order and organizing the Kingdom of God than it did on plural marriage. Why? Because plural marriage is flourishing today among thousands more than at the time of the Manifesto, but the United Order and the Kingdom of God are phantoms of the past. But after all, this is what the Gentiles really wanted all along. The lawmakers were not so forthcoming about their own religious bigotry. Their aim was to destroy the Church's economic and political power, and bigamy was their tool. Enc. of Mormonism, 152. It is generally believed by members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that their church holds all the keys of the priesthood. This theory has been purported by two Mormon authors, Brian Hales and Max Anderson, in their books, The Priesthood of Modern Polygamy and the Polygamy Story, Fiction and Fact. They refer to D&C 132:7, in which the Lord reveals that there is only one man with that authority. Here the Lord said, I have appointed unto my servant Joseph to hold this power in the last days. This can mean two things. 1. The one man is always the president of the church, or 2. The one man is Joseph Smith, as it is clearly written. This means Joseph Smith could pass on authority and keys to others, and still retain all the keys and the right of being the one man presiding over this dispensation. It states that Joseph holds them in the last days, undoubtedly meaning in this dispensation. Just because he is a dead prophet does not mean he has lost the presiding keys or authority. As we are told, he is yet working with this people. Hales and Anderson promote the idea that the one man holding all the keys is, and has always been, the senior apostle and president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Priesthood of Modern Polygamy, page 10. However, after the Manifesto, the sealing keys seem to have been lost within the Church. From their own mouths they have testified that they no longer hold those keys. President Heber J. Grant claimed, no man upon the face of the earth has any right or any authority to perform a plural marriage, and there are no plural marriages today in the Church of Christ, because no human being has the right to perform them. Gospel Standards, H. J. Grant, page 150. If there is one man who was supposed to hold that power in the last days, and now no man upon the face of the earth has any right or any authority to perform a plural marriage, what are we to conclude? Have the last days passed by? Is the one man dead? Is there no way to live this eternal principle? Couldn't that one man have delegated sealing keys to others? It seems the press. Heber J. Grant testified that since he did not hold keys of sealing, he assumed no one else did either. Going back to the time of the 1890 Manifesto, no one can blame Wilford Woodruff for desiring some kind of relief from government. The major reasons they gave for the Manifesto were 1. To stop the persecution. 2. To regain their real estate. 3. To permit Mormon immigration again. 4. To return the temples. 5. To prevent long and expensive legal defenses. 6. To release men from prison. 7. To return church leaders from the underground. 8. To resume ordinance work in the temples. 9. To stop paying rent to the government for church buildings. 10. To make peace with the nation and the world. Noble reasons, every one. But no matter how reasonable this all sounded, there was one serious thing wrong with it. The Lord had told them repeatedly not to give up plural marriage. That alone should outweigh all the reasons man can devise. But because the Church gave it up as a church law, did not mean that plural marriage was not still a law of the priesthood, to be lived outside the Church. According to Apostle Franklin D. Richards, it continued to be a matter of free agency. If all Israel will not be sanctified by the law which their Moses Joseph Smith first offers them, they will peradventure receive a law of ordinances administered to them, not according to the power of an endless life. J.D. 1:321. When the saints raised their hands to sustain the Manifesto, they, as did the children of Israel, traded higher priesthood laws for lesser ones. Also similar to the children of Israel, they traded the government of God for the government of Babylon, and became hewers of wood and drawers of water in the Gentile kingdom. A major catastrophe occurred with the announcement of the Manifesto. Up to that time, it had been taught that living plural marriage was essential to exaltation. With the acceptance of the Manifesto, it meant that from then on, no one in the Church was to obey this critical law. There had been no revelation from God saying that this law had been changed. The Mormons simply gave up plural marriage, thinking that it now had nothing to do with their exaltation. We should also consider this. If it is incorrect doctrine, then it was also wrong for the previous 40 years, and the Church finally got set in order in 1890. On the other hand, if it were an eternal revelation from God and a law for admission into the highest degree of the celestial kingdom, then the Manifesto is a farce and meaningless to those who continue to defend it in theory and practice. Whatever man may think of the manifesto, good or bad, apparently the Lord didn't approve of it. From the time Wilford Woodruff put his signature on that document and the people voted to accept it, the Lord has given no more thus saith the Lord revelations to the LDS Church. No matter how many explanations and excuses the Mormons offered for compromising with the manifesto, non-Mormons, who didn't even believe in plural marriage, wondered at their justification for giving it up. For instance, the Catholic Church printed the following in their encyclopedia. One reason given for the persistent hostility to the Mormons was the dislike caused by the acrimonious controversy over polygamy or plural marriage. Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, claimed to have received a revelation and a command ordering him to reintroduce plural marriage and restore the polygamous condition tolerated among the pre-Judaic tribes. Polygamy now became a principle of the Creed of the Latter-day Saints and, though not enforced by the laws of the Mormon hierarchy, was preached by the elders and practiced by the chiefs of the cult and by many of the people. The violation by the Mormons of the monogamous law of Christianity and of the United States was brought to the attention of Congress, which prohibited under penalty of fine and imprisonment the perpetuation of the anti-Christian practice, refusing, however, to make the prohibition retroactive. The Mormons appealed to the Supreme Court, which sustained the action of Congress and established the constitutionality of the anti-polygamy statutes. The Latter-day Saints, strangely enough, submitted to the decrees of Congress, unwittingly admitting by their submission that the revelation of their founder and prophet, Joseph Smith, could not have come from God. If the command to restore polygamy to the modern world was from on high, then, by submitting to the decision of the Supreme Court, the Mormon hierarchy reversed the apostolic proclamation and acknowledged it was better to obey man than to obey God. What a poor example was set for other world religions when the Grand Compromise of 1890 was issued. Since the Gentiles will criticize the saints for both living and not living these principles, it seems the safest course to pursue is to obey God's laws rather than man's laws.